All right. Earlier today, Vice President J.D. Vance was having a press conference, and he was asked about negative reaction to the memorandum of understanding, the deal that he's been out there on every show selling. Isn't it interesting that J.D. Vance was chosen to sell the deal going around? President Trump even said if the deal falls through, he's going to blame it on J.D. So obviously J.D. Vance is very invested in this deal working. And he was asked, right, about the possibility of the Israelis torpedoing the deal, of Israeli pushback against the deal, of the fact that there are Israeli political figures who are critical of the deal. And he had some choice words to say that I would like to comment on. Okay, so let's take a look at what J.D. Vance had to say. I'm, as you can see, I'm a little bit worked up right now. Let's take a look.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Jordan Conradson with the Gateway Pundit. I want to talk back to the Lebanon component of the deal. There's a report in Axios that Netanyahu's fuming over this. Israel doesn't feel bound to the MOU as it relates to Lebanon. If, as you mentioned, your frustration with Israel striking in Beirut, hitting apartment buildings, if that continues, could it torpedo the deal? And what would the U.S.'s response be to a broader war in Lebanon involving Israel and Hezbollah?
Yeah, well, I don't want to get into hypotheticals that could torpedo the deal, because I think the president's expectation is that all of our friends, the Israelis, the Arabs in the region, we're going to work together and actually see this deal to completion. Now, I saw the Axios report, that Netanyahu is fuming. That's not reflective of the conversations that I've had with him, but maybe he's saying something to somebody else that he's not saying to me. What I will say, and this does bother me, is that you've seen people within Bibi's cabinet who have come out and attacked the deal, and in some ways very personally attacked the president of the United States. And I guess my message to them would be twofold. Number one, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. And the second message I would give to some of those cabinet members, Bibi, to his credit, has not gone down this path, but to some of these cabinet members in Israel who are attacking the president of the United States, the other thing that I would say is that over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars. The problem for Israel is not Donald J. Trump. And anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the president of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in. Thank you all.
All right. There's J.D. Vance. So that's what he had to say. So J.D. Vance is there lecturing Israel about who its friends are. And listen, he's right about one thing. He's right about the fact that President Trump is the greatest friend Israel's ever had, and Israeli politicians should be more careful about lobbing criticisms at him, even at a time like this. There is no one more friendly to Israel. And this is a problem that the pro-Israel community has, of like going to extremes. Like if Trump makes a decision we don't like, the sky is falling, he's betrayed us, it's over. If Trump does something we like, we're like, yeah, he's Cyrus the Great, he's our hero. We got to just relax, okay? Now, it's also not true that President Trump is the only head of state in the world who's pro-Israel. That's just patently false. But nevertheless, Vance is here lecturing Israel. And I have to be honest with you, it actually makes me angry what he said. Not because I think Israel's cabinet ministers are always right, not because I don't understand the political pressure that Trump is under. I get it. I understand his calculus. President Trump made a determination that this deal was in his best interest. But what Vice President Vance just said is just wrong. It's strategically foolish. It comes off as petulant and arrogant. And he's done this before. Look, this is the same line. He was echoing the same line we've been hearing from a lot of people who do not understand the U.S.-Israel relationship. Let me break this down. Vance says, and I'm paraphrasing, that 2/3 of the defensive weapons protecting your homeland were built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars. Now, to people just listening sort of casually, it's like, oh, 2/3 of your weapons, 2/3 of what you've used. Okay, this is very specific. He said it like it's some sort of knockout punch, like Israel should sit down, be grateful, and stop complaining. So let's go through the actual numbers. And some of these I've quoted many times before, but let's set the whole frame of the U.S. support for Israel's military. Makes it sound like 2/3. Someone just doesn't really know and they're listening. Oh, 2/3 of what the Israelis have used. No. U.S. military aid to Israel is $3.8 billion a year. Yes, there's occasionally supplementals. $3.8 billion a year. That sounds like a lot. It's roughly 10% at most of Israel's defense budget. Before October 7th, it was around 11%, but Israel's defense budget has increased by orders of magnitude ever since then, so that the number that the U.S. aid to Israel constitutes has actually gone down as a percentage. And by the way, Israel's been selling billions and billions of dollars of air defenses to Germany and Greece. Germany and Greece alone in the last 6 months have purchased about $10 billion in Israeli air defenses, and there's other countries too. So the entire annual American aid package is like a third of that. So when Vance stands up there and implies that American taxpayers are basically carrying Israel's military, it's just not true. Okay? People think there's this conception that the U.S. bankrolls Israel's military. Israel's military is like over 90% paid for domestically. Okay, yes, there's aid. And here, the 2/3 number he's using is about a specific defensive weapon, specific air defense weapons that were used during this war. Okay, yes, so fine, it could be, yes, you have 2/3 of that. But the implication is that Israel's some sort of dependent client state that owes America silence and gratitude no matter what. That's an insulting lie, and it speaks to a problem of Israeli dependence. But here's what Vance doesn't mention. America has military bases all over the Middle East. Yes, for some of you on this channel, this is repetition, but we need to hear this. We need to remember these talking points. America has military bases all over the Middle East: Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt is not official. How much does it cost to run those bases? Billions and billions of dollars. It's a massive Air Force base in Jordan. Personnel, equipment, operations, and none of that is called foreign aid, right? That's just defense spending. So yes, Israel gets the most foreign aid because there's no base in Israel. Israel gets $3.8 billion with no American base on its soil, no American soldiers in Israeli, in uniform in Israel. Oh, but Israel's the biggest beneficiary of American generosity. You have these countries where their entire defense infrastructure is Americans. You know why there's no American base in Israel? Because Israel doesn't need one, and America doesn't need to have one there because Israel fights for itself and is a real ally. It's the only ally in the region that America doesn't have to babysit. And it saves American taxpayers far more than $3.8 billion a year. But that's a separate issue. I still don't like the aid. Forget about how it actually benefits America. That's America's problem. We'll get into that more in a minute. But here's something that no one's talking about. It goes directly to Vance's argument about American weapons building Israeli security. Listen to this. This is an important argument. I don't know if I've ever really laid it out. Listen carefully to this. Because here he's talking about 2/3 of the air defense weapons, of the defenses that saved you were manufactured by Americans and funded by us. Whoa. The current memorandum of understanding governing U.S.-Israel defense assistance, okay, one that still is in force until, I think, 2028, still covers the relationship right now. It was signed at the end of the Obama administration in 2016. And buried in that deal, in that MOU, that 10-year MOU that didn't take effect yet, it took effect in, I think, 2018. Buried in that deal was a provision that phased out something called offshore procurement. What is offshore procurement? It was an arrangement that allowed Israel to take a portion of American military assistance, a portion of it, up to 26.3% of it, and spend it on its own domestic weapons manufacturers. In other words, the American military assistance that Israel was allowed to use, like a quarter of it, a little more, on its own domestic weapons industry, Israeli defense industry, Israeli jobs, building Israeli capabilities in Israel. And Obama's MOU that was signed in 2016 eliminated that carve-out. Under this 2016 MOU, that percentage gets phased down to 0. 100% of American military assistance to Israel must be spent on American products from American companies. The White House's own fact sheet from 2016 said this explicitly, that discontinuing offshore procurement means that Israel will spend as much as $1.2 billion per year more on American-produced capabilities. So one of the goals, let me sum this up, one of the goals of the Obama MOU on aid to Israel, 10-year MOU, was that it would phase out Israel's ability to spend any of that money on its own military industry. So what did this mean? What it means is that Obama's MOU took over $1 billion a year out of Israel's domestic defense industry and redirected it to American defense contractors. So what this ended up doing was that Israel was coerced through the structuring of this clause in the aid into hollowing out its own manufacturing capacity in exchange for continued American assistance. You get it? Because basically saying there's about $1 billion or so that you'd be spending at home at your own military industry. You now can't spend it at home. You have to spend that in America. So Israel ends up, and you have to buy all these munitions with it. We're not going to let you make them yourself anymore because now you're just going to spend that money here. Basically, Israel had to shut down certain parts. That was the point of it, was for Israel to shut down certain parts of its own manufacturing so that they buy the weapons from America. And now, years later, here we are. Israel finds itself in a multi-front war and reaches for that domestic industrial base. It's not fully there because the MOU with Obama undermined it. That's what's been going on since October 2023. This stuff has been phased out. A lot of Israel's military industry was being phased out because of this clause in the MOU. So Israel was more dependent on the munitions from the United States because they couldn't make them themselves. And remember, when you make it yourself, you can also sell and make money off it. So it's not just one-to-one in terms of the dollars. And Vance was citing that dependency as a reason that Israel should be grateful and quiet. This is exactly why Israel needs to end the aid relationship entirely. I've written about this. I've been saying this for years. I said it on the Charlie Kirk show. I wrote about it in the Jerusalem Post. Israel needs to end its aid relationship with America. Yes, there's things we gain, but it handcuffs us. The aid was never designed primarily to help Israel. It was always used from the late 1970s with Jimmy Carter all the way through to Obama. The aid to Israel was always ramped up and structured to create leverage over Israel. It started with the Camp David Accords with Jimmy Carter. That was the first big aid to Israel to coerce Israel or to encourage Israel to surrender land for peace. Right? Israel had to give up vital security assets and got guarantees of aid money as compensation. Then under Obama, in the same deal that was supposed to help Israel, it caused them to gut their own ability to manufacture itself. So the aid to Israel has always been a double-edged sword for Israel from the beginning. That's my point. You take the money, you become dependent. You become dependent, you lose freedom of action. You lose freedom of action, then one day a vice president stands at a podium and tells you to remember who paid for your Iron Dome. No. Israel needs to build its own industry, spend its own money, and answer to no one. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been moving in this direction. The numbers are already pointing that way. Israeli defense exports are exploding. The economy is growing. The defense budget has more than doubled in a decade. The $3.8 billion is becoming less and less significant as a percentage of what Israel actually spends. This is the right direction, and we need to accelerate it now. And this is the part that really bothers me. Vance is making this argument in the context of lecturing Israeli cabinet ministers for objecting to the MOU with Iran. The MOU, the 14-point MOU that is just being signed now. Let's remember, Israel's not a party to this deal. Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement on day one when this deal was announced, the opening line of the statement was that Israel is not a party to this deal. They were not included in the negotiations. They didn't even see an advanced draft of it before it was agreed to. An agreement that states in its very first clause that there will be, quote, an immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon. In other words, the United States negotiated with Iran over what Israel can and cannot do in Lebanon. And then when Israeli ministers said, hey, wait a second, we're not bound by this. We don't consider ourselves bound by this because why should they be? They weren't in the room. They weren't negotiating. It was a deal between the U.S. and Iran, and Israel never said they were a part of it. And the United States negotiates what Israel can and can't do. And when Israeli cabinet ministers say, We don't consider ourselves bound by this. Vance goes to the podium and says to shut up and be grateful for American weapons funding. Hello. If Israeli ministers are actually saying we're an independent nation that makes our own decisions, just like you're America first, God bless you, be America first, we have to be Israel first. We have to look after our own nation. And he's castigating them for that. Hey, look, Mr. Vice President, we don't have the same interests necessarily. You can go ahead and cut whatever deal you want. We don't have the same interests. Yes, we're very grateful. That doesn't mean we have to go along with every deal that you make that's in your best interests. We have to look out for our best interests. It's called sovereignty. Think about what just happened here. Iran demanded as a non-negotiable condition of any deal that Israel end its operations in Lebanon. The United States agreed to put that language in the MOU. And Israel, which fought this war alongside America, endured weeks of Iranian ballistic missile and drone attacks, lost soldiers in Lebanon, and was cut out of the room entirely. And now the response to Israeli pushback is, we pay for your Iron Dome. Hey, you cut us out. We're not part of the deal. We're not part of the deal. We don't have to adhere to it. And Vance says that Netanyahu himself hasn't criticized the deal, only far-right cabinet members like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Okay. But Netanyahu's own office has stated clearly that Israel is not a party to the MOU. Israel has not accepted the Lebanon clause. Defense Minister Katz has stated that IDF troops will remain in southern Lebanon regardless of the agreement. The agreement does not explicitly call for withdrawal, but it implies it. So this is not just a fringe right. It's not just some members of the cabinet. This is the Israeli government's official position. And the response from the Trump administration publicly has been to question Israel's judgment, threaten the defense relationship, and remind Israel of its dependence. Listen, I want this administration to succeed. I want it to succeed in everything it's doing with Iran. I want Trump to be successful. I want a real deal with Iran, if you could get one. I don't think you can get one. That actually dismantles the nuclear program? Yeah, if you can do that. I'm not anti-Trump, not even close, far from it. You would have had to have met me today only to think that I'm anti-Trump. I was literally one of the most public campaigners for Trump. Like I wrote a column in the Jerusalem Post campaigning for Trump early on, before other people were calling for it. I'm very pro-Trump. But I also care about my country, and I'm going to call out a mistake when I see it. And right now I'm watching an American administration that genuinely does support Israel slide into a pattern right now. And with Vance's comments here, it's right in there that uncomfortably looks like the Biden playbook. Different flavor, same dynamic. Public pressure, financial leverage, an implicit message, behave yourself, fall in line. Israel's biggest problem right now is not J.D. Vance, but the road to Israeli strategic independence runs away from this relationship, not deeper into it. And the sooner Israeli leaders and the people who support Israel around the world internalize that, the better. Israel needs to be independent. We're a good ally. We share a lot of interests with the U.S. We'll protect American interests, but we're going to protect our own interests. The security of our people comes first. America has its interests. We respect that. We'll try to align. But we live in the Middle East. We know these people, and we have to do what we need to do to protect the state of Israel. God bless. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. Thank you for helping the channel grow.